In the third part of this 4-part series, I'm going to base my research on a publication regarding a historical person, for which one of my viewers provided me a link to take a look at and see what I thought. My name is Michelle Gibson. The historical person was Jan Amos Komensky, also known as John Amos Comenius. Have you ever heard of him? I sure hadn't. Not being known to the general public is interesting to note, given that he has been credited with introducing and dominating the whole modern movement in the field of elementary and secondary education, first notated in the foreword of this publication. I didn't have to look any further than the first page of the publication to have several things jump out at me. The publication was written by Otakar Adlozilik, Ph.D., a Czechoslovak professor who specialized in things like Reformation currents of thought, the immigration of the Czech Brethren, and the influence of Bohemia, a historical region of what was Czechoslovakia, but historically Bohemia referred to the entire Czech territory, which included Moravia and Silesia, called the lands of the Bohemian Crown, historically ruled by the Bohemian kings. At any rate, Dr. Adlozilik became an American citizen in 1955 and taught his specialized knowledge of influential Czechoslovak history in American universities. The publication is in commemoration of the 350th anniversary of Comenius's birthday. I have found that many world fairs, expositions, and exhibitions were held in commemoration of specific events in history, like the World's Columbian Exhibition, also known as the Chicago World's Fair, held in 1893, to celebrate the 400th anniversary of Christopher Columbus's arrival in the New World in 1492, and said to have been designed by many prominent architects of the day. Christopher Columbus first set sail for the New World from Spain on August 3rd of 1492. In the same year, on January 2nd of 1492, the Sultan of the Emirate of Granada, Muhammad XII, surrendered to Queen Isabella I of Castile and King Ferdinand II of Aragon, signaling the end of Moorish rule in Spain in our historical narrative. We are told that after the World's Columbian Exposition ended, all of the structures built for the exhibition were destroyed except for the Palace of Fine Arts, now Chicago's Museum of Science and Industry. The Statue of the Republic in Jackson Park today is described as a gilded and smaller replica of the statue of the 1893 exposition. The original statue of the exposition was said to have been destroyed by fire, and the new statue, sculpted by the same artist, was erected in 1918 to commemorate both the 25th anniversary of the World's Columbian Exposition and the centennial anniversary of the statehood of Illinois. Dr. Adlozilik's publication about Comenius was published in Chicago by the Czechoslovak National Council of America in 1942. More on the year 1942 in a bit. The Austro-Hungarian Empire was a constitutional monarchy and great power in Central Europe between 1867 and 1918. That was dissolved after its defeat at the end of World War I. Part of the Austro-Hungarian Empire until the end of World War I, Czechoslovakia was founded as a sovereign state on October 28th of 1918 and existed until it was dissolved into the separate countries of the Czech Republic and Slovakia on January 1st of 1993. Its government was communist from 1948 to 1989. Like the Austro-Hungarian Empire, the Ottoman Empire, primarily in a region known in the world today as Turkey, existed as a vast empire and center of interactions between East and West until the end of World War I, when it was defeated as an ally of Germany and occupied by Allied forces. At that time, the Ottoman Empire was partitioned and lost its Middle East holdings. which were divided between the Allied forces. Notice a pattern here. War, then the losing sides get taken down, new forms of government installed, and the original history missing in action. According to Dr. Odlazalik, Comenius was born on March 28th of 1592, almost 100 years to the day that the Alhambra decree was issued on March 31st of 1492, where we are told Spanish Jews were given the choice of converting to Catholicism or leaving the kingdoms of Castile and Aragon. This decree may have originally applied to the Moors as well. It is out there somewhere in the field of information that the next day, April 1st, became known as April Fool's Day, because while the Moors were told they had the same option, their ships and homes were burned and many were killed. While this may or may not be true, it would not surprise me at all if it was true. What are some of the things that have happened on the day of Comenius' birth, March 28th, in history? Well, to name a few, the short-lived Paris Commune was formally established on March 28th of 1871. A radical socialist, anti-religious, and revolutionary government that ruled Paris until it was suppressed by the French army in May of 1871. What happened in the Paris Commune was closely followed by London resident Karl Marx, who published a pamphlet in June of 1871 called The Civil War in France, about the significance of the struggle of the communards in the Paris Commune. On March 28th of 1939, Francisco Franco conquered Madrid after a 3-year siege at the end of the Spanish Civil War, marking the beginning of his 36-year dictatorship, which ended in 1975. The State Council of the People's Republic of China dissolved Tibet on March 28th of 1959. And on March 28th of 1979, the coolant leak at 3 Mile Island's nuclear reactor outside of Harrisburg, Pennsylvania, caused a partial meltdown, the nation's worst commercial nuclear accident. The same year of 1871 that Marx published The Civil War in France about the Paris Commune was the year that the U.S. Congress passed the District of Columbia Organic Act, which repealed the charters of the cities of Washington and Georgetown and established a new territorial government for the District of Columbia. This created a single municipal government for the federal district, which was incorporated, which is defined as the process of constituting a company, city, or other organization as a legal corporation. The year of 1871 was also the year that the Criminal Tribe Act was enacted in India, criminalizing entire communities by designating them as habitual criminals, and restrictions on their movements imposed, including men having to report to the police once per week. Affecting tribes like the Bhil Minas tribe, the ruling tribe of India's Udaipur district before the Mewar kingdom forced them to hide out in the surrounding hills, named as a criminal tribe by the British government in 1924 to keep them from regaining power. To this day, the Bhil Minas tribe is a scheduled tribe. A scheduled tribe is recognized by the Indian Constitution, has political representation, and yet legally, totally, or partially excluded from various types of services important for leading a healthy life, and altogether, the scheduled tribes of India make up almost 10% of the population and are considered India's poorest people. So we have the fall of Granada and Columbus's discovery of the New World in 1492 and Comenius's birth in 1592. So let's see what else happened in corresponding years in the centuries between 1492 and 1992 in roughly 50-year intervals, since there seemed to be a relationship. What else happened around 1492? Well, the first grammar text for Castilian Spanish was published. It was the first book dedicated to the Spanish language and its rules, and the first grammar of a modern European language to be published in print. Martin Beheim of Bohemia was said to have constructed the first surviving globe of the earth, called the Erdapfel, or Earth Apple, about whom the German-English geographer and cartographer Ernst Georg Ravenstein wrote in 1908. The Stiegl Brewery was first recorded in Salzburg, one of the most common brands of beer in Austria. And Rodrigo Borgia, taking the name of Alexander VI, was elected as the 214th Pope in the 1492 Papal Conclave, which was the first papal conclave held in the Sistine Chapel. The following year, in 1493, Pope Alexander VI issued the Inter Cetera Bull. This papal bull essentially authorized the grab of the lands of the ancient advanced civilization. Among other things, the bull assigned to Castile the exclusive right to acquire territory, to trade in or even approach the lands laying west of the meridian situated 100 leagues west of the Azores and Cape Verde Islands, except for any lands actually possessed by any other Christian prince beyond this meridian prior to Christmas of 1492. It is important to note that the 1452 Dum Diversas papal bull of Pope Nicholas V granted the Crown of Portugal full and free permission to invade, search out, capture, and subjugate unbelievers and enemies of Christ wherever they may be, and to reduce their persons into perpetual slavery. And his 1455 Romanus Pontifex papal bull was a follow-up to the Dum Diversas, confirming the Crown of Portugal's dominion over all the lands discovered or conquered during the Age of Discovery, encouraging the seizure of the lands of the Saracens, pagans, and other enemies of Christ, and repeated the earlier bull's permission for the enslavement of such peoples. These three papal bulls became major documents in the development of subsequent legal doctrines regarding claims of empire in the New World. While it is important to mention that Saracen was a term for Muslims widely used in Europe, it is also the name given to giant megalithic standing stones in Great Britain and other places called Sarsen, shortened from Saracen stones. Next, I will look at some of the things that happened around 1540 to 1542. In 1540, Pope Paul III issued a papal bull forming the Jesuit order under the leadership of Ignatius Loyola, a Basque nobleman from the Pyrenees in northern Spain. The Jesuit order included a special vow of obedience to the Pope in matters of mission direction and assignment. In 1541, the Spanish conquistadors arrived in New Mexico under the leadership of Francisco Vázquez de Coronado in an expedition starting in Mexico that was organized with the stated goal of finding the 7 golden cities of Cibola. The Coronado expedition was said to have led to numerous battles with the indigenous people of New Mexico, including the Tiguex War in the middle of 1540 and 1541. Devastating to the Tiwa Pueblos, the Tiguex War was said to be the first named war between Europeans and Native Americans in what became the United States, against numerous pueblos in what was known as the Tiguex Province, located north and south of present-day Bernalillo, New Mexico. In 1541, the Spanish conquistador Hernando de Soto reached the Mississippi River. The Parliament of Ireland declares Henry VIII and his heirs to be monarchs of Ireland by passing the Crown of Ireland Act, replacing the Lordship of Ireland with the Kingdom of Ireland. And Gerardus Mercator made his first globe in 1541. In the year of 1542, Pope Paul III established the Holy Office, also known as the Congregation for the Doctrine of the Faith, and the Inquisition. And St. Francis Xavier, a co-founder of the Jesuits, landed in Goa on the Indian subcontinent and part of the Portuguese Empire of the day, where some believe he requested the brutal Goa Inquisition, established, we are told, to enforce Catholic orthodoxy in colonial-era Portuguese India. In 1542, Portuguese explorer Juan Rodrigues Cabrillo landed in San Diego Bay and became the first European to set foot in California. In 1590, the governor of one of England's earliest attempts at colonization, the colony of Roanoke in North Carolina, John White, returned from a supply trip to find the colony deserted, known to us as the Lost Colony, and its fate a mystery to this day. It is interesting to note that John White was also an artist who went on 5 voyages to this part of what is now North Carolina between 1584 and 1590, and said to have provided the first views of the New World to England through his numerous sketches. Problem is, what if the Algonquin peoples didn't actually look and live like that? The Algonquin tribes and language groups are among the most populous and widespread in North America. I found the Algonquin-speaking Navasink Lenni Lenape people in previous research who historically inhabited the Raritan Bayshore near Sandy Hook and Mount Mitchell and the scenic highlands of eastern New Jersey. The memory of the Navasink people is retained in the name of the Navasink Twin Lights on the headlands of the Navasink Highlands, overlooking Sandy Hook Bay, the entrance to the New York Harbor and the Atlantic Ocean. We are told that the Navasink Twin Lights were built in 1862. The American Civil War was said to have taken place between 1861 and 1865, so we are expected to believe this solid masonry structure was built during wartime. In 1591, the Portuguese invaded the Kingdom of Jaffna in northern Sri Lanka, killed the king of Jaffna, and installed a client monarch, with the conditions of freely allowing Catholic missionary activity, handing over the elephant export monopoly to the Portuguese, and increasing the tribute paid by the kingdom to the Portuguese. The Battle of Tondibi took place in Mali in 1591, the decisive confrontation in Morocco's 16th century invasion of the Songhai Empire, leading to the downfall of the dominant force in Western Africa. Apparently, the Sultan of Morocco turned his attention to the gold mines of that region due to the expense of paying for the defenses to hold off the Portuguese. The ruler of Mali from 1312 to 1337, Mansa Musa, was said to be one of the richest men in world history, if not the richest. One of his titles was Lord of the Mines of Wangara. During his reign, Mali might have been the largest producer of gold in the world. Has the general population ever heard of him? Does this immense wealth fit the historical narrative we've been given about this part of the world? In the year of 1592, the Japanese were said to have started invading Korea over a 6-year period with the intent to conquer the Korean peninsula and China. That ultimately resulted in a Korean and Chinese victory and the expulsion of Japan from the Korean peninsula. Between 1592 and 1593, there were plague epidemics around Valletta in Malta, where we are told a temporary isolation hospital was set up on an island in the Marsamxett harbor called the Isoloto, and to which 900 suspected and confirmed cases were sent, with the rest of the population being told to self-isolate. And in London, where 15,000 people were said to have died in the last major plague outbreak of the 16th century, and almost 5,000 more in the surrounding parishes, for which John Stowe was said to have copied and preserved records of the outbreak. Next, on to things that happened in our historical narrative between 1640 and 1642. The year of 1640 marked the end of the Iberian Union, which had been the dynastic union of the kingdoms of Spain and Portugal that existed between 1580 and 1640 under the Spanish Habsburg kings of Philip II, Philip III, and Philip IV. This is a coin bearing an image of King Philip II of Spain. A bust of King Philip II by Pompeo Leone, and a portrait that is typical of King Philip II. Also called the House of Austria, the House of Habsburg was one of the most distinguished and influential royal houses of Europe, and in addition to Portugal and Spain, produced the kings of Bohemia, Hungary, Croatia, Galicia, as well as the emperors of Austria, Austria-Hungary, and Mexico, and principalities in the Netherlands and Italy. The throne of the Holy Roman Empire was continuously occupied by the Habsburgs from 1440 until their extinction in the male line in 1740. Here are some pictures sent by a viewer of the Zvikov and Orlik castles on the Vltava River in historic Bohemia, in what is now the Czech Republic today. The Holy Roman Empire was ultimately dissolved in 1806 with the abdication of the last Holy Roman Emperor, Francis II, of the House of Habsburg-Lorraine, in favor of Napoleon as the protector of the Confederation of the Rhine. A historical whitewash may be difficult to get one's head around based on what we have been taught, but evidence is there when you start looking. Here is the example of two existing portraits of the Holy Roman Emperor Charles V, who ruled from 1500 to 1558, with similar facial structure, hands, and clothing between the two portraits. Why would one portrait become the face of the ruler and the other fade to obscurity and hard to find? Here are some examples of German coats of arms with the more sound and the name. During the time Comenius lived in London between 1641 and 1642, he was said to have written the Via Lucis, or the Way of Light. It was his proposal to a group of scholars on its way to becoming the Royal Society of London in 1660 for an international academy in England, with resident and corresponding members of scholars who share the same foundation of knowledge, the same mission, and the same language. In 1641, the Irish Rebellion began, with Irish Catholic gentry attempting to seize control of the English administration in Ireland to force concessions for Catholics. The Irish Catholic gentry failed, and the Irish Rebellion was said to be the origin of the ethnic conflicts between Irish Catholics on one side and English and Scottish Protestants. This crude drawing is typical of what is out there to depict what took place during the 1641 Irish Rebellion. The rebellion had followed the organized colonization of English and Scottish settlers known as the Plantation of Ulster. In 1642, the English Civil Wars started, ultimately leading to the execution of King Charles I, and the rule of Oliver Cromwell for a period of time as Lord Protector, and set the course for Great Britain becoming a constitutional monarchy. Cromwell, described as a brutal military leader, had led the Parliament of England's armies against King Charles I during the English Civil War. Charles I was the son of King James I of England and VI of Scotland, for whom both of these portraits exist, and the brother of Elizabeth of Bohemia. In 1690, the Battle of the Boyne took place between the forces of the former King James II, who had been deposed in the Glorious Revolution of 1688, and King William III of Orange in the Dutch Republic, and his wife, James II's daughter, Queen Mary II, who had acceded to the crowns of England and Scotland in 1689. It was fought across the River Boyne, close to the town of Drogheda in Ireland, and resulted in a victory for King William, and after his defeat, James Stuart fled to France. The supporters of James Stuart were known as Jacobites, those who supported the restoration of the House of Stuart and were active from 1688 to around 1750. The son of James II, James Francis Edward Stuart, is known to history as the Old Pretender. He was first exiled to France and then to Rome, where he died in 1766. He would have been heir to the three thrones of England, Scotland, and Ireland, but was forcibly prevented from claiming them when he tried to do so in the Jacobite uprising of 1715. George I, the first king of the German House of Hanover, became the British monarch in 1714. In 1691, the Massachusetts Bay Colony received a royal charter that formally established it as the province of Massachusetts Bay, including the Maine and Plymouth colonies. And Thomas Neal was an English project manager, entrepreneur, and politician who was granted an English patent for the American Postal Service and became the first Postmaster General of the North American colonies. Here he is depicted on a cigar band. 1692 was the year of the Salem witch trials in Massachusetts, and the year an earthquake struck Port Royal in Jamaica, causing one of the busiest and wealthiest ports in the West Indies to sink below sea level, and taking place only 42 years after the city was founded in 1650. And Kingston, Jamaica was founded in 1692, shortly after the earthquake devastated Port Royal. Next is the year of 1740. This year was the start of the Great Frost of Ireland, an extremely cold weather event in the historical record in Ireland between 1740 and 1741. Irish historian David Dixon talks about this little-known event in his book, Arctic Ireland. The Irish population endured 21 months of bizarre weather without known precedent that defied conventional explanation. The cause is not known. Shortly after I learned about the cold weather event in Ireland, I was connected by someone to the mudflood community on YouTube. I learned about the fantastic research that is being done by people looking at their own communities and other places around the world as strong evidence that there was a cataclysmic event involving a massive flood of mud as recently as 200 to 300 years ago. It is being called a reset event, and that photographic evidence exists that buildings, canals, rail lines, tunnels, among other things, were purposefully dug out after the event to the point where they could be used. I have speculated in past videos that the extreme cold weather event in Ireland was related to the hijack of the original timeline and the mud flood. What else happened in 1740 and the historical record? The War of Austrian Succession started in December of that year and lasted 8 years, which we are told was the last great power conflict with the Bourbon-Habsburg dynastic conflict at its heart, with the accession of Maria Theresa, the last of the Habsburg rulers, and marked the rise of Prussia as a major power, with Prussia gaining lands in the 1748 Treaty of Aix-la-Chapelle and Austria losing lands, among other terms and concessions among the signatories of the treaty. In 1741, the Royal Order of Scotland was founded, which is an order within the structure of Freemasonry whose members are invited to join based on advanced Masonic criteria. Is it just a coincidence that the logo of the Royal Order of Scotland on the left has a symbol that resembles the sun in the logo of the Jesuits on the right? Or a coincidence that both resemble one version of the black sun symbol? The black sun was said to have first originated in Nazi Germany as a symbol for a mystic energy source and also used in occult subcultures. I first learned about the black sun several years ago in this book by author Peter Moon. In April of 1742, Handel's Messiah premiered in Dublin. Handel's Messiah premieres in Dublin right after the extremely cold, lethal weather event. So, who shows up during this same time period? Well, In 1744, Mayer Amschel Rothschild was born in Frankfurt, Germany. He established his banking business there in the 1760s, marking the start of the international banking family and the central bank system. Then on February 6 of 1748, Bavarian Illuminati founder Adam Weishaupt was born in Ingolstadt, Bavaria, Germany. He went to a Jesuit school at the age of 7 and was initiated into Freemasonry in 1777. Next, in 1790, President George Washington gave the first State of the Union address in New York City. The Supreme Court of the United States convened for the first time. The first United States Census was authorized. And the United States patent system was established. In 1791, the Bank of the United States in Philadelphia is incorporated by the federal government with a 20-year charter, a central bank concept championed by the first Treasury Secretary, Alexander Hamilton. The French royal family is captured in the French Revolution as they tried to escape in disguise to Varennes. And the construction of the Brandenburg Gate in Berlin was said to have been completed. In 1792, the Legislative Assembly in revolutionary France voted to dissolve the monarchy and establish the First Republic. King Louis XVI and Queen Marie Antoinette were arrested that year, which led to their trial and subsequent execution in 1793. President George Washington signed into law the Postal Service Act, thereby creating the United States Post Office Department. And King Gustav III of Sweden was assassinated at a midnight masquerade at the Royal Opera when he was shot in the back by a Swedish military officer. In 1840, on January 19th, the United States exploring expedition of Captain Charles Wilkes sights what becomes known as Wilkes Land in the southeastern quadrant of Antarctica, claiming it for the United States. And 2 days later, on January 21st, French naval explorer Jules Dumont d'Urville arrived in Antarctica and claimed what he named Adélie Land after his wife for France. 1 day later, on January 22nd of 1840, British colonists reached New Zealand and officially founded the settlement of Wellington. A viewer from New Zealand sent me the following photographs. The first is of a work crew appearing with rails with steep embankments of dirt on either side of the rails. It looks like they were digging out the rail line. Then he sent these from the 1906-1907 New Zealand International Exhibition. In 1841, Fordham University was founded in the Bronx by the Jesuits. President John Tyler vetoed a bill which called for the reestablishment of the Second Bank of the United States, the second federally authorized Hamiltonian national bank in its 20-year charter. Fire was said to have destroyed 300 to 500 of the housing units in Mayaguez, Puerto Rico. And the Treaty of Nanking, or Nanjing, was signed in 1842 between the British Empire and China, after China's defeat in the First Opium War. The First Opium War was fought between the Qing dynasty of China and Britain between 1839 and 1842, a military engagement that started when the Chinese seized opium stocks in Canton in order to stop the opium trade, which was banned. The British government insisted upon free trade and equality among nations and backed the merchants' demands. From 1757 to 1842, the Canton system served as a means for China to control trade with the West by focusing all trade in the southern port of Canton. To counter this, the British East India Company began to grow opium in Bengal, in present-day Bangladesh, and allowed private British merchants to sell opium to Chinese smugglers for illegal sale in China. As a result from these events in history, opium dens, establishments where opium was sold and smoked, became prevalent in many parts of the world throughout the 19th century. In 1890, the book The Influence of Sea Power Upon History, 1660 to 1783, by Alfred Thayer Mahan, was published while he was president of the Naval War College in Newport, Rhode Island, which was considered by scholars to be the single most influential book in naval strategy, and its policies quickly adopted by most major navies and ultimately led to the World War I naval arms race. And Sir Flinders Petrie, the grandson of Sir Matthew Flinders and son of William Petrie, an electrical engineer who developed carbon arc lighting, excavated the first major site in Palestine, Tel el-Hasi, during which he was said to have discovered how tells were formed. A tell is described as an artificial hill created by many generations of people living and rebuilding on the same spot using mud bricks which disintegrate rapidly. And in 1890, the first American football team was fielded by Ohio State University, with a photo of the team standing in front of an old stone archway. In 1891, the Jamaica International Exhibition was held and said to have been modeled after the London Great Exhibition of 1851. The credit for the idea of the exhibition was given to Augustus Constantine Sinclair, who ran the government printing office in Jamaica. Also in 1891, Liliuokalani was proclaimed Queen of Hawaii. She was the last sovereign monarch of the Hawaiian Kingdom from January 29th of 1891 until the overthrow of the Hawaiian Kingdom on January 17th of 1893 by subjects of the Hawaiian Kingdom, U.S. citizens, and foreign residents residing in Honolulu. The article I was reading didn't say who specifically. The Republic of Hawaii was established as an interim government between 1893 and 1898, when the Hawaiian Islands were annexed to the United States. This is King Kalakaua, Liliuokalani's brother, the last elected monarch of the Kingdom of Hawaii. He had lost his absolute power in 1887 when he was pressured to sign a new constitution that provided for a constitutional government, leaving the monarchy as a figurehead. In 1892, Ellis Island was opened to new immigrants on January 1st. From 1892 to 1924, approximately 12 million immigrants arriving at the Port of New York and New Jersey were processed there under federal law. What were other firsts in the year 1892? In January, James Naismith's rules for basketball were published for the first time. The first public basketball game was played in Springfield, Massachusetts on March 11th of 1892. Which brings to mind a comparison of the ball of the sport of hoops compared with the hoop configuration of the sacred hoop dance of Native Americans, of which the sacred hoops dance is also connected to depicting the flower of life, the creation pattern of the universe. And in 1892, the world's first fingerprinting bureau opened in Buenos Aires, Argentina. So these 50-year periods of time, starting from 1492, bring me back to the reason why I went down this path for this video. It was the information that jumped out at me when I saw the front page of the publication about Comenius, a 350-year commemoration of the anniversary of his birth that was published in Chicago of 1942. As a function of time, a period is defined as a round of time, or series of years by which time is measured. In physics, a time period is the time taken for one complete cycle of vibration to pass a given point. Indigenous calendrical systems like the Mayan calendar were involved with the harmonization and synchronization of human beings with natural cycles of time. Nines have significance in the development of the Mayan calendar. For example, in the Mayan calendrical system, there are 9 cosmic levels, called underworlds, in the evolution of consciousness. There are 450 years between 1492, the year of the fall of Granada and Columbus's first voyage, and 1942, midway through World War II and the year of the Philadelphia experiment, which I believe were the boundary years of a new 3D time loop called Rome. Also, the year 1942 is a numeric anagram to 1492. There are 9 50-year periods between 1492 and 1942. Halfway at 225 years is the year 1717. I think we have been living under an occulted system of time. I found these anomalies when I started looking at historical events from the year 1717. On June 24, 1717, the premier Grand Lodge of England, the first Freemason Grand Lodge, was founded in London. And then on 7/17/1717, an interesting date from a numerological perspective, the premiere of George Frederick Handel's water music took place for King George I on a barge on the River Thames in London. Exactly 200 years later, on 7/17/1917, the reigning royal house of the United Kingdom and its Commonwealth, the House of Windsor, was founded after the death of Queen Victoria, and also of German paternal descent. Almost halfway through World War II, on July 22nd of 1942, the strange Philadelphia experiment took place at the Philadelphia Naval Shipyard. These next slides give an overview of the experiment. Did the USS Eldridge just become invisible? Or did it go somewhere else? And if it went somewhere else, where might it have gone? I think the negative beings responsible for what has taken place here had to come up with a way to create a cataclysm by creating a rip in the fabric of space-time, which allowed them to incarnate here in physical form. I think the 1740 to 1741 Great Frost of Ireland I mentioned previously was where this rip in the fabric of space-time occurred, and that the Philadelphia experiment was a causal factor of the rip. A time-traveling naval vessel is already out there in the field of information. There was a 1980 movie called The Final Countdown about the USS Nimitz going back in time to the day before the attack on Pearl Harbor on December 7th of 1941. And researchers like Dr. David Anderson, who seriously explore time travel at his Anderson Institute. I believe what we have been taught is a conglomeration of what were originally real people and belief systems. The new timeline was somehow inserted, and everything was grafted onto the existing infrastructure of the Earth and falsely attributed in the new historical narrative. As an example of a way this was achieved, here are portraits of different people having similar-looking facial features around the eyes, nose, and mouth. On the top left is Thomas Gilbert, captain of the British East India Company's East Indiaman vessel, Charlotte, for whom the Gilbert Islands were named. On the top right, Canadian entrepreneur and brewer John Molson. On the bottom left is Major General Claude Martin, the wealthiest Frenchman in 18th century India and the founder of the La Martiniere schools. And on the bottom right, William Strickland, the architect credited with designing the Tennessee State Capitol building, with a construction date given between 1845 and 1859. Were they related? Did people look more alike back then? Or were there facial templates used by artists to depict people like this? The beings behind this went through the trouble to do all of this because in a free will zone like Earth, the human beings who live here have to give their consent to choose whether to follow the light or the dark. It was rigged to benefit them and not for our best interest, in order to maintain power and control over humanity. The negative beings behind all of this wanted to set up a new god as Lord of the world, Lucifer, and wanted a proxy vote for their hostile takeover. They wanted to persuade enough of humanity to voluntarily accept Lucifer over the creator of the universe. The only way they can accomplish this acceptance, however, is by outright lies, deception, and duplicity, because if people knew the true agenda of these controllers, the majority of humanity would never, ever accept this. I believe that these beings with a negative agenda devised a complicated plan to knock humanity off the positive Moorish timeline of higher consciousness. In an interdimensional war, in order to control humanity, using humans as their tools against a creator and creation, the controllers of this world had tricked us into worshiping them and have kept our consent for this system by lying to us about its existence. They are evil beings who have committed unspeakable crimes against humanity and creation. I would like to give a shout out to 3 very good field researchers on YouTube who are investigating their communities. Berserker Bear is currently bushwhacking Tartaria, where he lives in Buffalo, New York, and he does fantastic field research. Paul explores Malta on his YouTube channel, where, among other things, he explores the extensive tunnel systems under star forts there. And C. Vasilis does excellent field research around where he lives in New York State. I will be mirroring a video from each of these 3 creators on my YouTube channel to share their work with you. I really want to emphasize the point that this ancient civilization is in your backyard, your neighborhoods, your business districts, your parks, and the list goes on and on. There is no place in the world this prolific civilization was not. Berserker Bear recently sent me a picture of a water tower in Buffalo, just a few minutes from where he lives. All you have to do is look, and there are answers impatiently waiting to be found in your own neighborhood. You don't have to go far to find the old world anywhere in the world. Remember the adage from the Bible, "Seek and ye shall find." In the 4th and last part of this series, I will be looking into topics of research suggested by commenters, including but not limited to the explorers Lewis and Clark and the Mandela effect.